As your guide led your horse towards a stable, you dismounted and ran a hand along the wall of the barracks. The stone was rough and cold, and you noticed something peculiar, with small square holes arranged in neat rows. These were put-log holes. They were the ghosts of the wooden scaffolding that had once clung to this wall during its construction. The builders had simply left the holes behind, a subtle, permanent record of how this great structure was raised. They were a reminder of the human hands that had placed every single stone. Your attention was then drawn to two other crucial buildings in the outer bailey. One was the chapel. It was a small but beautifully constructed stone building, its architecture more refined than the purely functional barracks and workshops around it. Often, the chapel and the keep were the first structures to be built in stone, a testament to the twin priorities of the medieval lord: faith and defense. The spiritual needs of the castle's inhabitants were as important as their physical security. The second feature was the well. It was housed in a small stone structure in the center of the bailey, its wooden winch and bucket looking simple, almost insignificant. But you knew this was perhaps the most critical strategic feature in the entire fortress. An army could survive without food for weeks, but without water, it would fall in days. The castle well was its lifeline, providing fresh water during a long siege. Its location was chosen with extreme care, ensuring it was protected and accessible. You took a moment to absorb the sheer, vibrant life of this space. The cacophony of sounds, the complex tapestry of smells, the feeling of uneven, muddy ground beneath your new boots. It was a world entire of itself, enclosed and protected by these great walls. Your guide, a stern-faced man-at-arms, returned and grunted for you to follow. Your tour was not over. You were being led away from the bustling life of the outer bailey towards the gate of the inner ward. You were moving closer to the heart of power, closer to the shadow of the keep. Passing through the inner gate was like stepping into another world. The clamor and chaos of the outer bailey were cut off as if by a closing door. Here, there was a sudden, profound quiet. The air was stiller, colder. The ground was not muddy earth, but neatly laid flagstones. This was the inner ward, the exclusive heart of Blackwood Keep. It was reserved for the lord, his family, and his most trusted officials. There were no workshops here, no clucking chickens or barking dogs. There was only the manicured space of a small courtyard, the entrance to the great hall, and the keep. The keep, it dominated everything. It was no longer a distant tower, but an oppressive, overwhelming presence. Its sheer, flat stone face rose into the sky, seeming to lean over you, to press down upon you. You felt dwarfed by its scale, an insignificant creature at the base of a man-made cliff. This was the dungeon, the ultimate stronghold. It was the castle's spine, its soul, and its last line of defense. If the outer walls were breached, the defenders would fall back to the inner ward. If the inner walls fell, they would retreat into the keep to fight to the last man. Its design was a masterpiece of Norman engineering. It was a massive, square tower, a style known for its brute strength and imposing simplicity. Its walls were immense, perhaps 20 feet thick at their base, providing a defense that was almost immune to the siege engines of the age. You noticed that the base of the keep's walls were not flat. They sloped outwards, a feature known as a batter or a plinth. This had two purposes. It strengthened the foundations of the massive structure, but it also served a clever defensive function. If defenders on the roof dropped rocks, the sloping base would cause them to bounce outwards, into the ranks of any attackers gathered at the bottom. It was a simple, yet brutal, piece of architectural design. The most unsettling feature, however, was the lack of windows. The ground floor had no openings at all, just solid, impenetrable stone. Higher up, the only breaks in the smooth face of the wall were a few tiny vertical slits, arrow slits. They looked like narrow zewits, and you could not shake the unnerving feeling that you were being observed from within those dark slits. This fortress valued security far more than comfort or light. You saw the entrance to the keep. It was not on the ground floor. That would be too vulnerable. Instead, a long, exposed stone staircase ran up the side of the building to a doorway on the first floor. Any attacker trying to reach that door would be completely exposed to fire from the defenders above. The doorway itself was protected by a small, fortified structure called a forebuilding. It was yet another layer in the castle's deep and complex defense. To one side of the keep stood another large, important building, the Great Hall. This was the social and administrative center of the castle. It was where the lord would hold court, dispensing justice and managing his lands. It was where the entire household would take their meals, a noisy communal affair. And it was where feasts and celebrations would take place, filling the space with music and firelight. Above the Great Hall, you knew, would be the solar. This was the private apartment of the lord and his family, a warmer, more comfortable space that offered them a retreat from the public life of the hall below. But even the Great Hall was dwarfed by the keep. The keep was the physical manifestation of the lord's power and authority. It was a statement in stone, a symbol of his right to rule, of his military might. From the highest turret, the lord's banner flapped in the wind, a splash of color against the gray stone and the gray sky. It was a proclamation, visible for miles, that this land and everyone in it belonged to the master of Blackwood Keep. The silence of the inner ward was broken only by the sound of your own footsteps echoing on the flagstones. It was a solemn, sobering space. The chill in the air seemed to radiate directly from the stones of the keep, a permanent coolness that sunlight never seemed to touch. Your guide pointed towards the stone staircase. It was time to go inside. He led you up the steps towards the forebuilding that guarded the entrance. You were about to enter the belly of the beast, the very heart of this living mountain of stone. You are shown to your chamber. It is a small, Spartan room, carved from the immense thickness of the keep's outer wall. There is a simple wooden cot, a small writing desk, and a stool. A single, unglazed arrow slit is your only window to the outside world. As your guide leaves, closing the heavy oak door behind him, you are left in the growing twilight. The day's activity begins to fade. The sounds of the bailey die down, replaced by the nightly routines of the castle. You hear the distant, mournful call of a horn, then the heavy, final sound of the great gates being barred for the night. The curfew bell begins to toll, a slow, steady rhythm that marks the end of the day. As true darkness falls, the world outside your arrow slit vanishes into a profound pre-industrial blackness. There are no city lights, no lingering glow on the horizon. There is only the moon, the stars, and an ocean of shadow. Inside your chamber, you light a single tallow candle. It is made from animal fat, and it sputters and smokes, casting long, dancing shadows that leap and stretch across the stone walls. The light is weak, pushing back the oppressive darkness only a few feet. The smell is greasy and thick. You understand now why beeswax candles, with their clean, sweet scent, were such a luxury, reserved for the chapel or the Lord's solar. This chamber is your new home. As the castle scribe, you hold a position of immense trust. In an age where literacy is a rare gift, you are the keeper of the castle's memory. You will read and write the Lord's letters, keep his accounts, and chronicle the events that unfold within these walls. Your quill and your ink are your tools, and your mind is your greatest asset. But as the night deepens, and the last human sounds fade away, the castle itself begins to speak. The silence is not empty. It is filled with a symphony of strange, unfamiliar noises. The wind, finding its way through every crack and crevice, whistles through your arrowslit. It is not a gentle sound. It is a low, mournful moan that seems to echo the loneliness of the open landscape outside. The ill-fitting wooden shutter on the slit rattles in its frame, a constant, nervous twitch. You feel a persistent, cold draft on the back of your neck. It seems to come from nowhere, a ghostly breath in the still air of the room. The stone walls, which absorbed the day's chill, now radiated into the small space. You see why the Lord's chambers are lined with heavy tapestries. They are not just for decoration. They are a crucial layer of insulation against the damp, biting cold of the stone, and they help to soften the harsh echoes that bounce around these chambers. The stone itself seems to be alive. The great corridors and spiral staircases act like a giant sounding board, carrying noises in strange and unpredictable ways. You hear the distant, echoing clang of a guard's halberd striking the stone floor during his patrol. The sound seems to come from right outside your door one moment, and from miles away the next. A cough from a soldier in a room 2 floors below might travel up a stone channel and whisper directly into your ear. You think of the castle's other hidden channels. The garderobes, the castle's toilets, are simple chutes that run down the outside of the wall, often emptying into the moat or a cesspit. As your guide led your horse towards a stable, you dismounted and ran a hand along the wall of the barracks. The stone was rough and cold, and you noticed something peculiar, with small square holes arranged in neat rows. These were put-log holes. They were the ghosts of the wooden scaffolding that had once clung to this wall during its construction. The builders had simply left the holes behind, a subtle, permanent record of how this great structure was raised. They were a reminder of the human hands that had placed every single stone. Your attention was then drawn to 2 other crucial buildings in the outer bailey. One was the chapel. It was a small but beautifully constructed stone building, its architecture more refined than the purely functional barracks and workshops around it. Often the chapel and the keep were the first structures to be built in stone, a testament to the twin priorities of the medieval lord, faith and defense. The spiritual needs of the castle's inhabitants were as important as their physical security. The second feature was the well. It was housed in a small stone structure in the center of the bailey, its wooden winch and bucket looking simple, almost insignificant. But you knew this was perhaps the most critical strategic feature in the entire fortress. An army could survive without food for weeks, but without water, it would fall in days. The castle well was its lifeline, providing fresh water during a long siege. Its location was chosen with extreme care, ensuring it was protected and accessible. You took a moment to absorb the sheer, vibrant life of this space. The cacophony of sounds, the complex tapestry of smells, the feeling of uneven, muddy ground beneath your new boots. It was a world entire of itself, enclosed and protected by these great walls. Your guide, a stern-faced man-at-arms, returned and grunted for you to follow. Your tour was not over. You were being led away from the bustling life of the outer bailey towards the gate of the inner ward. You were moving closer to the heart of power, closer to the shadow of the keep. Passing through the inner gate was like stepping into another world. The clamor and chaos of the outer bailey were cut off as if by a closing door. Here, there was a sudden, profound quiet. The air was stiller, colder. The ground was not muddy earth, but neatly laid flagstones. This was the inner ward, the exclusive heart of Blackwood Keep. It was reserved for the Lord, his family, and his most trusted officials. There were no workshops here, no clucking chickens or barking dogs. There was only the manicured space of a small courtyard, the entrance to the great hall, and the keep. The keep, it dominated everything. It was no longer a distant tower, but an oppressive, overwhelming presence. Its sheer, flat stone face rose into the sky, seeming to lean over you, to press down upon you. You felt dwarfed by its scale, an insignificant creature at the base of a man-made cliff. This was the dungeon, the ultimate stronghold. It was the castle's spine, its soul, and its last line of defense. If the outer walls were breached, the defenders would fall back to the inner ward. If the inner walls fell, they would retreat into the keep to fight to the last man. Its design was a masterpiece of Norman engineering. It was a massive, square tower, a style known for its brute strength and imposing simplicity. Its walls were immense, perhaps 20 feet thick at their base, providing a defense that was almost immune to the siege engines of the age. You noticed that the base of the keep's walls were not flat. They sloped outwards, a feature known as a batter or a plinth. This had two purposes. It strengthened the foundations of the massive structure, but it also served a clever defensive function. If defenders on the roof dropped rocks, the sloping base would cause them to bounce outwards into the ranks of any attackers gathered at the bottom. It was a simple, yet brutal, piece of architectural design. The most unsettling feature, however, was the lack of windows. The ground floor had no openings at all, just solid, impenetrable stone. Higher up, the only breaks in the smooth face of the wall were a few tiny, vertical slits, arrow slits. They looked like narrow zewits, and you could not shake the unnerving feeling that you were being observed from within those dark slits. This fortress valued security far more than comfort or light. You saw the entrance to the keep. It was not on the ground floor. That would be too vulnerable. Instead, a long, exposed stone staircase ran up the side of the building to a doorway on the first floor. Any attacker trying to reach that door would be completely exposed to fire from the defenders above. The doorway itself was protected by a small, fortified structure called a forebuilding. It was yet another layer in the castle's deep and complex defense. To one side of the keep stood another large, important building, the Great Hall. This was the social and administrative center of the castle. It was where the Lord would hold court, dispensing justice and managing his lands. It was where the entire household would take their meals, a noisy, communal affair. And it was where feasts and celebrations would take place, filling the space with music and firelight. Above the great hall, you knew, would be the solar. This was the private apartment of the Lord and his family, a warmer, more comfortable space that offered them a retreat from the public life of the hall below. But even the great hall was dwarfed by the keep. The keep was the physical manifestation of the Lord's power and authority. It was a statement in stone, a symbol of his right to rule, of his military might. From the highest turret, the Lord's banner flapped in the wind, a splash of color against the gray stone and the gray sky. It was a proclamation, visible for miles, that this land and everyone in it belonged to the master of Blackwood Keep. The silence of the inner ward was broken only by the sound of your own footsteps echoing on the flagstones. It was a solemn, sobering space. The chill in the air seemed to radiate directly from the stones of the keep, a permanent coolness that sunlight never seemed to touch. Your guide pointed towards the stone staircase. It was time to go inside. He led you up the steps towards the forebuilding that guarded the entrance. You were about to enter the belly of the beast, the very heart of this living mountain of stone. You are shown to your chamber. It is a small, Spartan room, carved from the immense thickness of the keep's outer wall. There is a simple wooden cot, a small writing desk, and a stool. A single, unglazed arrowslit is your only window to the outside world. As your guide leaves, closing the heavy oak door behind him, you are left in the growing twilight. The day's activity begins to fade. The sounds of the bailey die down, replaced by the nightly routines of the castle. You hear the distant, mournful call of a horn, then the heavy, final sound of the great gates being barred for the night. The curfew bell begins to toll, a slow, steady rhythm that marks the end of the day. As true darkness falls, the world outside your arrowslit vanishes into a profound, pre-industrial blackness. There are no city lights, no lingering glow on the horizon. There is only the moon, the stars, and an ocean of shadow. Inside your chamber, you light a single tallow candle. It is made from animal fat, and it sputters and smokes, casting long, dancing shadows that leap and stretch across the stone walls. The light is weak, pushing back the oppressive darkness only a few feet. The smell is greasy and thick. You understand now why beeswax candles, with their clean, sweet scent, were such a luxury, reserved for the chapel or the Lord's solar. This chamber is your new home. As the castle scribe, you hold a position of immense trust. In an age where literacy is a rare gift, you are the keeper of the castle's memory. You will read and write the Lord's letters, keep his accounts, and chronicle the events that unfold within these walls. Your quill and your ink are your tools, and your mind is your greatest asset. But as the night deepens, and the last human sounds fade away, the castle itself begins to speak. The silence is not empty. It is filled with a symphony of strange, unfamiliar noises. The wind, finding its way through every crack and crevice, whistles through your arrowslit. It is not a gentle sound. It is a low, mournful moan that seems to echo the loneliness of the open landscape outside. The ill-fitting wooden shutter on the slit rattles in its frame, a constant, nervous twitch. You feel a persistent, cold draft on the back of your neck. It seems to come from nowhere, a ghostly breath in the still air of the room. The stone walls, which absorbed the day's chill, now radiated into the small space. You see why the Lord's chambers are lined with heavy tapestries. They are not just for decoration. They are a crucial layer of insulation against the damp, biting cold of the stone, and they help to soften the harsh echoes that bounce around these chambers. The stone itself seems to be alive. The great corridors and spiral staircases act like a giant sounding board, carrying noises in strange and unpredictable ways. You hear the distant, echoing clang of a guard's halberd striking the stone floor during his patrol. The sound seems to come from right outside your door one moment, and from miles away the next. A cough from a soldier in a room 2 floors below might travel up a stone channel and whisper directly into your ear. You think of the castle's other hidden channels. The garderobes, the castle's toilets, are simple chutes that run down the outside of the wall, often emptying into the moat or a cesspit below. They are another conduit for sound, another source of strange drafts and unsettling gurgles from the depths. Lying on your cot, you pull the rough wool blanket up to your chin. You listen. The building groans and settles under its own immense weight. The wind howls a new, higher note. The shadows thrown by your single, smoky candle twist into unfamiliar shapes. In the profound silence of the medieval night, every small sound is magnified. It becomes a character in the darkness, a voice in the gloom. The sounds are not just random noises. They feel like whispers, like a language you do not yet understand. This first night leaves you with a deep and lingering sense of unease. You are not just in a building. You are inside a creature of stone and wind. And as you lie there, listening to its nocturnal symphony, you plant the first seed of your great investigation. What is this castle trying to say? As you lie in your cot, listening to the symphony of stone and wind, what sound do you think would be the most unsettling to hear in the deep silence of the night? Share your thoughts. I'd love to read them as our story continues. The first days in Blackwood Keep have passed into a week, then a month. The rhythm of your new life has begun to take hold. You have learned the faces of the guards, the names of the kitchen servants, and the precise times of day when the Lord is best approached with a question. Your small chamber, once a cold stone box, has become your own. Your quills are neatly arranged, your inkpot is full, and a small stack of parchment, filled with your neat script, is growing on your desk. You are performing your duties well. But another task, a secret investigation, now occupies your thoughts. The castle continues to speak to you in the quiet hours of the night. Its groans, its whispers, its sudden, chilling drafts have become familiar companions. You are no longer simply a resident here. You have become an investigator of this great stone creature. And so, you begin your work, not with myths or legends, but with the castle itself. You will decipher its language, piece by piece, starting with the very path you walk every single day. Your duties, as the castle scribe, require you to move between the various levels of the keep. From your scriptorium high in the tower, you must descend to the great hall to receive instructions. You must climb to the solar to deliver a finished letter. Your world is a vertical one, and the only path is the main spiral staircase. At first, it was just a means of travel, a long, dizzying climb. But now, you see it for what it truly is, a work of defensive genius, a machine designed for conflict. It is called a turnpike stair. You have learned this from one of the older masons. It winds upwards, a tight corkscrew of stone around a central pillar known as a newel. As you ascend, the spiral turns to the right. It moves clockwise. This is not an accident. You realize, with a sudden flash of insight, that this design is a subtle and brilliant trap. You pause your climb, holding your candle aloft. You are right-handed, like most men. If you were climbing these stairs as an attacker, a sword in your right hand, your swing would be severely hampered. Your blade would strike the wide central pillar with every blow. You would have no room to generate any power. The newel, the very spine of the staircase, would become your enemy. But now imagine a defender, a right-handed swordsman, coming down the stairs to meet you. His sword arm, on the outside of the curve, has all the room it needs. He can slash and thrust downwards with the full, unimpeded arc of his arm, using gravity as his ally. The staircase was built to favor the defender, giving him a profound and likely fatal advantage. It is a masterpiece of tactical architecture. The steps themselves are part of the weapon. They are steep, forcing any attacker to move slowly, to lift his legs high, exposing him to a downward strike. They are also incredibly narrow, ensuring that men can only climb in single file, preventing them from overwhelming the defenders with sheer numbers. One skilled swordsman at the top of these stairs could, in theory, hold off a dozen attackers from below. You've also noticed a strange and treacherous detail. About halfway up the first flight, there is one step that is slightly taller than the others. The first time you climbed in the dark, you stumbled on it. You thought it was a flaw, a mistake by the builders. But now you understand. It is a trip stair, a deliberate imperfection. In the heat of a battle, in the poor light of a chaotic assault, that single, uneven step would be enough to make an attacker lose his footing. For just a moment, he would be off balance. And in a sword fight, a moment is all it takes. But it is the psychological effect that truly fascinates you. As you continue your climb, you place your free hand on the cold, worn stone of the central newel for balance. The repetitive, circling motion is disorienting. The flickering light from your candle throws a swirling, confusing pattern of shadows onto the curved walls. There are no straight lines, no clear points of reference. There is only the endless, turning ascent into the gloom. And then there are the sounds. The acoustics of this stone tube are a world of their own. Your own footsteps do not sound natural. The hard, curved surfaces cause the sound to reverberate, to bounce in unpredictable ways. The echo of your boot on the stone seems to come from both above your head and from somewhere down below. It sounds unnervingly, as if two people are walking on the stairs, not just one. On your first few journeys, you would often stop. You would hold your breath, listening for the footsteps of the person you were sure was following you. But there was only silence. The footsteps only began again when you did. It was your own echo chasing you up the stairs. A phantom companion born of stone and geometry. Even the air seems to play tricks on you. The staircase acts as a natural chimney, and a cold draft always seems to be flowing up or down. It feels like the subtle rush of air displaced by someone walking quickly past you. A cold breath on your cheek that makes you turn, expecting to see someone standing there. The Devil's Staircase, one of the guards called it. It is a name well earned. It is a place that manufactures ghosts out of echoes and drafts. It is the first piece of your puzzle. There are other, smaller staircases too, hidden within the immense thickness of the walls. These are postern stairs, secret paths that allow the Lord and his family to move about the castle unseen. They are even narrower, even steeper. They are veins of passage, running through the stone body of the keep, and their acoustic tricks are even more pronounced. A word whispered at the bottom of a postern stair can sometimes be heard with perfect clarity 2 floors above. You reach your destination, the door to your own small chamber. You look back down the dark, swirling void of the staircase. You understand its military purpose completely now. You also understand how a nervous young guard, on his first night watch, could swear he heard someone walking up the stairs behind him, their footsteps always just out of sight. You have deciphered the secret of the stairs. Now your attention turns to the other sounds, the mournful whispers that seem to come from the outer walls themselves. Your investigation now leads you to the walls of the keep, specifically to the tall, narrow openings that pierce the stone at regular intervals, the arrowslits, or, as they are more accurately called, the loopholes. During the day, they are your only source of natural light. They are slivers of the outside world, framing a tiny vertical slice of sky or landscape. At night, they are channels for the wind and the cold. From a military perspective, they are, like the staircase, a work of defensive brilliance. You stand in the embrasure of one now. The opening on the inside of the wall is wide, splayed at an angle. This gives you, the archer, a broad field of view and a wide arc of fire. You can aim your bow left or right, covering a large area of the ground below. But the hole on the outside of the wall is a tiny, narrow slit. For an attacker, it presents an almost impossible target. You can shoot out with ease, while they can barely hope to shoot in. It offers you near total protection. You see how the design has evolved? The oldest slits in the keep are simple vertical lines, but some, in the newer sections of the castle, are more complex. They are shaped like a cross, with a horizontal slit added. This was an innovation to accommodate the crossbow. It allowed the crossbowman to aim his weapon more easily, and the circular openings at the end of each slit, called oilets, gave him a better view. These loopholes are placed with immense strategic care. Some are positioned to allow for enfilade fire, meaning they can shoot along the face of the wall, catching any attacker who gets too close in a deadly crossfire. Every single angle of approach to the castle is covered. There is no safe place to stand at the base of these walls. But your investigation is not about their military function. It is about their secret life as musical instruments. Tonight, a storm is rolling in from the hills. The wind is rising, and the castle is beginning to sing its eerie song. You press your ear to the cold stone beside the slit. The wind, which howls and roars outside, is forced through this tiny, narrow opening. As the air is squeezed, it accelerates, and it begins to make a sound. It is a principle of aerodynamics, the same one that allows a flute to create a note. At first, it is a low moan, a deep, mournful sound that seems to rise from the very belly of the stones. It is a lonely, desolate sound, the kind of sound one might associate with grief or despair. But as a stronger gust of wind hits the wall, the pitch changes dramatically. The moan becomes a high-pitched shriek, a thin, piercing wail that cuts through the silence of the chamber. It sounds like a scream of agony, and it makes the hairs on your arms stand up, even though you know its source. You spend hours just listening. You move from one loophole to another, cataloging the sounds. Each one has a slightly different voice. A wider slit creates a lower, breathier tone. A narrower one produces a higher, sharper whistle. The cross-shaped slits are the most complex. The wind passing over the different openings creates multiple tones at once, a strange, discordant harmony. They are called Aeolian tones. You remember from your studies, named after Aeolus, the Greek god of the winds. You can only imagine the psychological effect for the inhabitants of the castle huddled inside during a winter storm. This chorus of moans and shrieks must have been a terrifying nightly occurrence. It would be so easy to imagine that the sounds were the wailing of unhappy spirits trapped within the castle walls. And what of the attackers outside? A besieging army camped in the dark, listening to the fortress they were attacking seemingly cry out in the night. It would be a deeply unsettling experience. A spray of rain is carried in on the wind, and you feel the cold, wet mist on your face. You smell the damp stone and the clean, earthy scent of the storm. The whispering loopholes are no longer a mystery. The walls are not haunted by voices. They are playing the wind. You have solved another piece of the puzzle. The external sounds are explained, but what about the deep internal noises? The strange echoes from the heart of the keep. Your investigation must now take you downwards into the cold, dark spaces that lie beneath the castle floors. Your next inquiry requires you to descend into the belly of the beast, an errand to the cellars to fetch a specific cask of wine for the Lord's table provides the perfect opportunity. You take a torch from a wall sconce and follow the steward down a flight of steps, steps that lead not up into the life of the keep, but down into its cold, silent foundations. The air changes instantly. It grows heavy, still, and shockingly cold. The constant, year-round coolness of the Undercroft is essential for preserving the castle's stores of food and drink. It is a natural refrigerator, insulated by the earth and many feet of solid stone. The steward finds the cask he needs, and after giving you a stern warning not to get lost, he heaves it onto his shoulder and departs. You are left alone. You hold your torch high. The ceiling above you is not flat, but a long, curved arch of stone, a barrel vault. This strong, simple design is perfect for supporting the immense weight of the floors above, but it also has a peculiar acoustic property. The curved surface focuses and amplifies sound in strange ways. You call out a single word, hello. The word comes back to you, not as a single echo, but as a cascade of whispers, seeming to bounce from one end of the long cellar to the other. In this silent, confined space, every sound is magnified. The scuff of your own boot on the floor, the rustle of your tunic, the sound of your own breathing, and then you hear it, a steady, rhythmic, dripping, plink, plonk, plink. Somewhere in the darkness, water is seeping through the stone and falling to the floor. In the profound silence, the sound is as loud and clear as a drumbeat. It is maddeningly persistent. You can easily see how a mind, strained by fear or isolation, could reinterpret that sound. It could become the slow, deliberate tread of footsteps, pacing back and forth, just beyond the reach of the light. You move further into the darkness, away from the stairs. You pass rows of barrels, smelling the musty scent of damp earth, of mold, and the faint, sweet aroma of aging wine and ale. The walls are rough to the touch, cold and slightly slimy with moisture. This is the larder of the keep, its stomach. Further back, the steward had pointed to a heavy, iron-banded door. He told you that it leads to one of the old storerooms, now unused, but the guards have another name for it, the dungeon. You know from your reading that purpose-built prisons were rarer in castles than stories suggest. Often, a secure storeroom like this one would serve the purpose. The word dungeon itself, you recall, comes from dungeon, the French word for the keep. The entire tower was, in essence, the prison. Some castles, however, had truly terrifying places, oubliettes, or bottle dungeons, so named because they were narrow at the top and wider at the bottom, making escape utterly impossible. A prisoner was lowered in from a hole in the ceiling, and then simply forgotten. The name itself came from the French word oublier, to forget. You shield your torch for a moment, letting the flame shrink behind your hand. The darkness is absolute. It is a physical presence, a thick, black blanket that smothers the senses. You cannot see your own hand in front of your face. This is sensory deprivation in its purest form, and you know what that can do to a human mind. Without light, without sound, the brain begins to create its own stimuli. It creates whispers in the silence. It paints fleeting, ghostly shapes in the total darkness. And there is another, even stranger phenomenon: infrasound. It is a very low-frequency sound, so low that the human ear cannot consciously hear it, but the body can feel it. These deep vibrations can be created by the wind buffeting the castle towers, or by the subtle shifting of the immense structure. And this inaudible sound has been known to cause feelings of intense unease, of dread, a sense of a presence in the room, and even the illusion of seeing things at the edge of your vision. This cellar, with its resonant stone arches, could be a perfect chamber for creating such a feeling. You unshield your torch, and the light feels like a physical rescue from the oppressive blackness. The knowledge that such a place exists deep within the castle, this cold, dark, silent space, adds to the Lord's power. It is a weapon of fear, as real as any sword or arrow. You have found the source of the internal echoes, the maddening drips, the oppressive feelings. It is not spirits. It is architecture and psychology working together in the dark. Emerging from the disorienting blackness below, you climb back towards the light and turn your attention upwards to the vast, shadowy spaces of the great hall. Your investigation now takes you to the very center of castle life, the great hall. It is evening, and the hall is filled with the clamor of the nightly meal. You stand near the entrance, by the large wooden screen that shields the hall from the drafts of the doorway. You are an observer here, a chronicler of details, and the details of this space are fascinating. The hall is a cavern of stone and timber. Its sheer size is designed to inspire awe, to remind all who enter of the Lord's power and status. The ceiling is a masterpiece of carpentry, a soaring network of dark timber beams that disappear into the shadows high above. This is where the life of the castle plays out. The Lord and his family sit at a high table on a raised platform called a dais, physically and symbolically elevated above everyone else. Long trestle tables fill the rest of the space, crowded with soldiers, servants, and guests. In the center of the hall, a great, open hearth burns brightly. The fire crackles and spits, and a thick column of smoke coils its way upwards, towards a louve, a ventilation hole in the roof. The smoke creates a constant, shimmering haze in the air, blurring the edges of everything, and making the rafters above seem to fade into an artificial night. The air is thick with the smells of roasting meat, of spilled ale, of wood smoke, and of dozens of unwashed bodies. But it is the sound that captures your scholarly attention. The acoustics of this vast chamber are a chaotic symphony. The high ceiling, the stone floor, and the hard plaster walls create a festival of reverberation. Sound bounces everywhere. A laugh from a soldier at the far end of the hall reaches you a second after you see him throw his head back. A shout from the high table seems to echo from the very walls around you. The babble of dozens of simultaneous conversations merges into a single, confusing roar, making it impossible to tell where any specific voice is coming from. You can now understand how legends of disembodied voices are born in a place like this. A single, sharp cry could echo for several seconds, seeming to hang in the air long after the person who made it has fallen silent. It would sound like a ghost's lament, a voice with no source, trapped in the great, smoky space of the hall. And then there are the shadows. The light in the hall is a living, moving thing. It comes from the great central fire and from the flickering torches set in iron sconces on the walls. This low, dynamic light is constantly shifting, making the shadows dance and writhe. They cling to the tapestries that hang on the walls, those heavy woven cloths that provide a touch of color and insulation. In the flickering firelight, the woven figures of knights and ladies seem to writhe and shift. A shadow cast by a passing servant can make a woven dragon seem to flick its tail. You watch as the lord's dogs squabble over a bone thrown from the table. Their shadows, cast huge and distorted by the fire, play out a battle of monsters on the far wall. It is a theater of shadow and light, a place where the eyes can be easily deceived. Between the lingering echoes and the dancing shadows, this hall is a perfect environment for the imagination to run wild. It is a stage, not just for the Lord's court, but for the creation of ghosts. You have analyzed the stairs, the walls, the cellars, and now the hall. You have all the pieces of your theory. You retreat to the quiet of your chamber to put them all together. Of all the castle's features we've explored so far, which one do you think would most effectively convince you that you've encountered something unnatural? I'm always fascinated by what sparks the imagination. The wind is calm tonight. The moon is a bright sliver in the sky, and its pale light filters through the loophole of your chamber. Your work for the Lord is done. The accounts are balanced, the letters are copied, but your true work, your personal chronicle, now lies open on the desk before you. This is the scriptorium, your small kingdom of ink and parchment. Here, the chaotic sounds of the castle fade into a gentle murmur, and you are left with only your thoughts and the task at hand. You have gathered the stories. You have listened to the whispers of soldiers and the fearful gossip of kitchen maids. You have heard tales of a mournful lady who weeps in the north tower, and of a phantom guard who endlessly paces the upper wall walk. These are the ghosts of Blackwood Keep, and tonight you will give them their true names. You dip your quill, a fine feather from a gray goose, into the pot of iron gall ink. The metallic, slightly acidic scent rises to meet you. It is the smell of knowledge, of permanence. You begin to write, the sharp nib of the quill making a faint, scratching sound as it moves across the rough surface of the parchment. This is your chronicle of disquiet. In the margins, you have already made sketches, a detailed drawing of a cross-shaped loophole, a diagram of the spiral staircase with arrows showing the advantage of the defender. Now, you connect the drawings to the stories. The tales of the mournful lady you write are most common on stormy nights. She is always heard, but never seen. Her cry is a high, desolate wail that seems to come from the very stones of the North Tower. You have stood in that tower. You have listened, and you know her voice. It is the cry of the wind, forced through a single, oddly shaped arrowslit, a flaw in the stone that turns a gale into a lament. The lonely guards, huddled in the dark and primed by superstition, hear not the wind, but the sorrow of a noblewoman, a ghost born of aerodynamics. Then there is the phantom guard. A young soldier swore to you that on his first watch, he heard the heavy, rhythmic tread of armored boots following him up the devil's staircase. He ran the last few steps in terror, only to find the top of the stairs empty. You write of the acoustic properties of the stairwell, of how the curved walls turn a single footstep into a confusing, pursuing echo. The phantom guard is not a spirit. He is a trick of geometry, a ghost made of sound waves bouncing from stone. And what of the infamous cold spots, the areas in a corridor or a chamber that are, for no apparent reason, shockingly cold? Servants whisper that these are the places where a spirit has passed. You write of drafts, of the way the immense stone walls hold the deep chill of the earth, creating pockets of cold air that stand in stark contrast to the warmth of a nearby fireplace. A cold spot is not the touch of a ghost. It is a lesson in how a building breathes. In a world where the supernatural is an accepted part of life, it is the simplest explanation for the unexplainable. This is the power of suggestion. One person has a frightening experience and tells the story with conviction. The next person who walks that same corridor is now primed for fear. They are expecting a ghost. Their mind, in a state of heightened alert, engages in confirmation bias. It will interpret every ambiguous sound, every fleeting shadow, as proof of what it already believes to be true. A legend is born not from a single event, but from a chain of perception. As a scribe, a man of letters and observation, you are in a unique position. You see the patterns that others miss. While they trade in fearful myths passed down in the smoky haze of the great hall, you deal in the currency of cause and effect. You are not a denier of wonders. You have simply found a different, more profound wonder, the wonder of the craft itself. You pause and hold the page up to the light of your single beeswax candle. The luxury of its clean, steady flame is a gift of your station, and you are grateful for the clarity it provides. The theory is forming, solid and clear, on the page. Now you must consider the vessel, the human mind itself. Your chronicle is not merely a study of stone and wind. It must also be a study of the human heart and the conditions that make it so susceptible to fear. You look out your narrow window at the vast, dark emptiness of the night. You reflect on the lives being lived within these walls. This castle is a world unto itself, a total institution, sealed off from the wider world for weeks or months at a time. And within this sealed world, a unique kind of tyranny takes hold, the tyranny of isolation. Winter is the cruelest season. You have survived one now, and you understand its power. The days grow short and gray. Snow piles up against the walls, muffling the world in a blanket of white, creating an even deeper sense of enclosure. More time is spent indoors, in the smoky, crowded confines of the great hall, or the cold solitude of a small chamber. The diet becomes a monotonous rotation of salted meat, dried fish, and coarse, dark bread. Such a diet can affect the mood, creating a sense of lethargy, of melancholy. You have even read of how tainted rye grain can bring about visions, a madness of the mind caused by a simple fungus. Life is governed by a rigid hierarchy. The lord and his family live in the relative comfort of the solar, while the soldiers and servants live a communal, public life with almost no privacy. Yet even in the crush of the great hall, a profound loneliness can take hold. You can be surrounded by 100 people and still feel utterly isolated, a small soul adrift in a vast, cold space. This is especially true for the noblewomen, often confined to their chambers for days on end, their world shrinking to the view from a single window and the patterns in a woven tapestry. Boredom is a constant enemy. The days are filled with repetitive tasks: guard duty, mending clothes, sharpening tools. In the evenings, entertainment is simple. A musician might play a tune on a lute. Men will play chess or dice. But the most popular entertainment of all is storytelling. And in the deep, dark nights of winter, the best stories are ghost stories, tales of betrayal, of tragedy, of spirits who can never find their rest. This is the fertile ground in which the seeds of fear are sown. Add to this the garrison mentality, the constant low-level stress of living in a fortress. Every man is trained to be vigilant, to watch for threats, to be suspicious of strange sounds in the night. Their senses are already tuned for danger. And in a world where belief in God and the devil, in angels and demons, is absolute, the line between an enemy outside the walls and an unnatural enemy within becomes terrifyingly thin. The deep, bone-aching chill of the stone seems to seep into the very marrow. The relentless howling of the wind during a winter storm, a sound that can go on for days, becomes a soundtrack for anxiety. In this environment, the human mind, starved of novelty and shrouded in cold and darkness, becomes a desperate storyteller. It will take the architectural quirks you have documented and weave them into a narrative, a drama of the supernatural. It needs the ghosts. They are more compelling than the simple, lonely truth of the wind. You think of the young guard on the stairs, his heart pounding in his chest. You think of the serving girl who refuses to go into the North Tower after dark. You feel a deep sense of empathy for them. They are not foolish. They are human. They are living within a machine designed to prey on their deepest, most primal instincts. The castle provides the sounds and the shadows. The isolation of their lives provides the meaning. The final piece of your thesis is not made of stone or wind or even fear. It is made of perception. It is the science of how the mind itself builds the world it experiences. As you sit in the quiet of your chamber, you realize the castle is not just a building. It is a grand experiment in the art of illusion. You are a witness to the subtle magic worked by the human brain as it tries to make sense of the sensory chaos of this place. You have catalogued the sounds, but you now consider the phenomenon of auditory pareidolia. This is the mind's tendency to hear meaningful sounds, like voices or whispers, in random, meaningless noise. The moan of the wind in a loophole is just noise, but the brain, a machine that is desperate to find patterns, searches for a familiar signal. It finds the cadence of a human cry. It creates a voice where there is none. The castle does not whisper. The listener's own mind does the whispering. The same is true for the eyes. Visual pareidolia. How many times have you, yourself, seen a face in the stains on a plaster wall, or in the complex grain of an oak door? In the low, flickering light of the great hall, the mind will see figures in the deep shadows between the rafters. It will see movement in the complex patterns of a tapestry. Our brains are wired to recognize faces and human forms above all else. It is a survival instinct. But here, in the half-light, that instinct becomes a source of phantoms. You think of the moments just before sleep, in that hazy borderland between wakefulness and dreams. This is the state of hypnagogia, where vivid hallucinations can occur. In the stress and cold of a castle night, it is easy to see how a dozing guard could be visited by terrifying visions, experiences that feel utterly, vividly real. The very quality of the light here plays its part. In the deep gloom of the corridors, the human eye changes how it sees. It becomes more sensitive to blues and greens, making shadows seem deeper, darker, more menacing. This is the Purkinje effect. And then there is the trickery of our own eyes. Our peripheral vision is excellent at detecting motion, but terrible at discerning detail. That flicker you see at the edge of your sight, the one that vanishes the moment you turn to look, is often just your own mind, misinterpreting a subtle shift in the shadows. The brain, you conclude, is a prediction machine. It does not passively receive information from the senses. It actively builds a model of the world, and it uses sensory information to confirm or correct that model. When the information is ambiguous, as it so often is in this castle, the brain will fill in the blanks with what it expects to find. If it expects to find ghosts, it will build ghosts from the raw material of shadow and echo. The castle becomes a mirror, reflecting back the fears and beliefs of those who live within it. This is the castle's true secret. It is not a stage for ghosts. The castle is the ghost itself. Its spirit is its architecture. Its voice is the wind. Its soul is its effect on the minds of men. The final entry, you take a fresh sheet of vellum, the finest calfskin, reserved for the most important records. This is the page that will contain your conclusion, the culmination of your long and silent investigation. You dip your quill, your hand steady. The scratching sound fills the quiet chamber as you begin to write the last words on this matter. The tone is not one of arrogant dismissal, but of deep and profound reverence for the truth. I came to this place, you write, a simple scribe, tasked with recording the deeds of a great lord. But I soon discovered another history, one written not in ink, but in stone and shadow. I have heard the stories of the spirits that are said to walk these halls, the ghosts of Blackwood Keep, and after many months of careful observation, I have come to know them well, but they are not what we believe them to be. In a world where the hand of the supernatural is seen in every unexplained event, this conclusion feels radical, perhaps even dangerous. But your duty as a chronicler is not to confirm old fears, but to record the truth as you have found it. The phantom footsteps on the stairs are an echo, born of a design meant to protect the living, not house the dead. The mournful wail from the tower is the wind, playing the stone like a flute. The cold touch in the corridor is the breath of the castle itself, a creature of draught and stone. These walls will outlast us all. My name will be forgotten. The names of the soldiers and servants will fade like breath on a cold morning. But the stone will remain, and its architectural voice will continue to speak to future generations. I have little doubt that the simple, thrilling stories of ghosts will survive longer than this, my rational account. A phantom night is a better tale than a lesson on acoustics. But the purpose of a chronicle is to preserve knowledge, in the hope that it will one day find a mind ready to receive it. My unspoken oath is to this truth. The master masons who built this fortress were anonymous geniuses. I do not know if they understood the full psychological power of what they were creating. I believe they built for war, for defense, for dominance. But in doing so, they also built a landscape of the mind, a place that generates its own myths. They built a haunting, and so my investigation ends. In seeking to explain the castle's ghosts, I have documented its true soul more intimately than any myth or legend ever could. The mystery is not that this place is haunted. The mystery is how exquisitely it is designed to make us feel that way. You lift the quill from the page. The final sentence is written. You reach for a small pouch and sprinkle fine, dark sand over the wet ink. The tiny grains absorb the excess, preventing smears and hastening the drying. You gently tilt the page, letting the sand slide off, leaving the words sharp and clear. The page is finished. The chronicle is complete. With a feeling of deep and peaceful satisfaction, you close the heavy, leather-bound cover of the book. The sound is a soft, definitive thud. And so, with a final grain of sand to dry the ink, you close the chronicle. The mystery is solved. The castle's ghosts have been given their true names. They are the echo in the stairwell, the wind in the loophole, the shadow in the hall. They are not spirits of the dead, but the very soul of the stone, speaking a language of architecture to anyone quiet enough to listen. You have done your duty. The truth is now recorded, safe within the pages of your book. Thank you for joining me on this investigation. I hope it has been a fascinating journey for you. Now, the main story is at its end, but our time together is not. Let the deeper quiet begin as we drift into the castle's later years. Rest easy. The story of our scribe and of the living, breathing castle of the Middle Ages has reached its end. The chronicle is closed, but the stones of Blackwood keep, and of 1,000 fortresses like it remain. They are silent now, their purpose forgotten, their halls empty, and so our own story shifts. We gently step away from the scribe's immersive world and into the long twilight of the castle itself. This is the epilogue of the fortress, the story of what happens when a weapon of war grows old and learns a new language of silence and memory. The great age of the castle did not end overnight. There was no single battle, no final day. It was a slow, creeping obsolescence, a gradual surrender to a new and terrible force, gunpowder, for centuries. The stone wall was the ultimate defense. A high, thick curtain wall could withstand almost any siege engine. It could hold back an army for months, even years. But in the 15th century, a new sound began to echo across the battlefields of Europe, the deep, earth-shaking roar of the cannon. At first, the cannons were unreliable, inaccurate, and slow, but they grew stronger. The science of artillery advanced, and the iron cannonball became the great equalizer. It could fly further and strike with a force that no siege engine could ever match. A sustained bombardment could now do the unthinkable. It could shatter stone. It could punch a hole through the thickest wall, turning a proud tower into a pile of rubble. The very foundation of castle design, vertical strength, had become a vulnerability. The response, in time, was a new kind of fortress, low, thick, angled walls of earth and brick were designed to absorb and deflect cannon fire. These new artillery forts, these great star-shaped fortresses, were wonders of engineering in their own right. But they were not castles. They had no soaring towers, no grand halls. They were purely functional, squat, and brutal. The age of the living mountain was over. Power, too, was changing. The old feudal system, a patchwork of powerful local lords, was giving way to centralized states ruled by kings and queens with national armies. A monarch no longer needed to rely on his barons to defend the realm. And he certainly did not want those barons to have impenetrable fortresses from which they could defy his own authority. Many castles were deliberately destroyed, a process known as slighting. Walls were pulled down, gates were smashed, and keeps were gutted, ensuring they could never again be used in a rebellion. During the English Civil War, hundreds of castles were slighted by order of Parliament, their power broken forever. But for most castles, the end was quieter. They simply became obsolete. They were expensive to maintain, cold, dark, and uncomfortable to live in. As the nobility grew more secure, they began to favor comfort over defense. They built grand, unfortified manor houses with large windows, spacious rooms, and elegant gardens. The old castle, the ancestral seat of power, was often abandoned, left to the wind and the rain. For centuries, these ruins were not seen as romantic or beautiful. They were simply derelict buildings, a convenient source of pre-cut stone for a new farmhouse or a village wall. The great halls became barns for sheltering sheep. The courtyards became overgrown with weeds and wildflowers. Ivy, patient and relentless, began its slow journey up the crumbling walls, its green tendrils probing every crack, prizing the stones apart, one by one. You can imagine such a place. The great keep of Blackwood, 200 years after our scribe has passed. The roof of the great hall has collapsed, and it is now a roofless court, open to the sky. On a clear night, the stars are visible through the empty frame of a high window. There is a deep, profound peace here. The silence is broken only by the rustling of the ivy and the gentle call of an owl. A place once filled with the clang of the blacksmith and the shouts of 100 soldiers is now utterly still. The stone of a fallen battlement, once sharp and new, has been worn smooth by centuries of wind and rain. It is a place of melancholy beauty, waiting patiently for its story to be rediscovered. For a long time, the ruined castle was a symbol of failure, of a time thankfully past. But as the world moved into the 18th century, an age of reason and scientific progress, a strange new hunger began to grow. A hunger for things that were not rational, not orderly, not safe. A hunger for mystery, for emotion, and for the past. And in the crumbling, ivy-choked ruins of the medieval world, this new age found the perfect object for its desires. The castle was about to be reborn, not as a fortress, but as a dream. This new movement was called Romanticism. It was a reaction against the clean, orderly logic of the Enlightenment. The Romantics celebrated wild nature, deep emotion, and the power of the imagination. They were fascinated by the past, not as a series of dates and facts, but as a source of mystery and wonder. And they fell in love with the ruined castle. To them, a ruin was not a failure. It was an object of sublime beauty. The sublime was an idea central to their art. It was a feeling of awe, of overwhelming grandeur, often mixed with a sense of terror. It was the feeling of standing on a mountain peak in a storm, or of looking at the vast, roaring ocean. and it was the feeling of standing in the shadow of a ruined keep at twilight. This fascination first took literary form in 1764. An English writer named Horace Walpole published a book called The Castle of Otranto. It was the first Gothic novel. It took a medieval castle with its dark corridors, its hidden passages, and its gloomy vaults, and it filled it with supernatural horror, with walking skeletons, with haunted portraits, and with prophecies of doom. The book was a sensation, and it created a brand new genre. The haunted castle, as we know it today, was born on its pages. A new generation of writers followed. Anne Radcliffe became one of the most popular novelists of her time, perfecting a style of Gothic fiction known as the explained supernatural. In her books, the heroine would be tormented by seemingly ghostly events, only for them to be revealed at the end as the work of clever villains or natural phenomena. In a way, she was doing exactly what our scribe did in his chronicle, but for the purpose of thrilling entertainment. Painters, too, were captivated by the romantic ruin. Artists like J.M.W. Turner and John Constable created dramatic, moody oil paintings of castles. They painted them lashed by storms, or bathed in the soft, melancholy light of the moon. These were not architectural studies. They were emotional landscapes. They captured the feeling of the place, its soul, rather than just its form. You can almost smell the old books in a dusty library, feel the pleasant, thrilling chill of reading one of these stories by candlelight, your imagination painting a lone figure silhouetted in a ruined archway against the moon. This fascination even led to a revival in architecture. Wealthy patrons began to build new homes in the medieval style. This was the Gothic revival. Great buildings, like the Houses of Parliament in London or the fairy tale castle of Neuschwanstein in Bavaria, were built to look like they came from another time. The castle was no longer a military necessity, but a powerful, romantic symbol. This era of rediscovery also sparked the beginning of genuine historical interest. The first antiquarians began to study the ruins, not as romantic symbols, but as historical documents. They began the long, slow work of preservation and understanding. But the stories, the Gothic novels and ghost tales, had a more powerful hold on the public imagination. They cherry-picked the most dramatic castle features, the dungeons, the secret passages, the isolated towers, and made them the central stage for their dramas. These literary ghost stories, with their complex plots and their focus on psychology, were a world away from the simple folk tales of the medieval period. And in creating this powerful new image of the haunted castle, they did something crucial. They divorced the haunting from its architectural cause. The ghost was no longer the wind in the loophole. It was now, and forevermore, a troubled spirit with a tragic story, a character in a drama of our own making. The romantic image of the haunted castle, born in the pages of Gothic novels, soon attached itself to real places. The architectural features that our scribe so carefully analyzed became the evidence, the proof of these new, more elaborate ghost stories. A tour of these famous phantoms shows us how the legends took root, wrapping themselves around the ancient stones until the story and the structure became inseparable. Let us begin at the Tower of London, its central keep. The White Tower is a perfect example of Norman architecture, stark, imposing, and built to dominate. But the tower is remembered more as a prison. It is here that the two young princes were said to have been murdered, their bodies hidden within a staircase. It is here that Queen Anne Boleyn, wife of Henry VIII, is said to walk, carrying her own head. The stories are powerful, but let us re-examine them through the scribe's eyes. Imagine the psychology of a captive in this place. The despair, the isolation, the constant fear. Imagine the sounds of this fortress on the river, the echoes in its cold stone chambers. The tower did not need ghosts. It was a machine for haunting the minds of the living. We travel north to Chillingham Castle on the turbulent border between England and Scotland. It is known as one of Britain's most haunted places. Stories are told of a torture chamber and of the ghost of a blue boy whose cries are heard in one of the castle's towers. During renovations, the bones of a boy and scraps of blue cloth were supposedly found within a thick wall. It is a chilling tale, but one that is amplified by its context. This was a castle built for brutal border warfare. Its history is violent. Its dungeons are real. On a modern ghost tour, the power of suggestion is immense. The mind is primed for fear, and the castle's natural drafts and sounds provide all the evidence it needs. In Scotland, we find Glamis Castle, a place of towering turrets and deep secrets. The most famous legend is that of the monster of Glamis, a terribly deformed heir who was supposedly locked away in a secret chamber his entire life. Another tale tells of an ancient lord who still plays cards with the devil himself in a hidden room. The castle's layout is famously confusing, a maze of passages and halls from centuries of additions. It is the perfect architecture for secrets, a place where it is easy to believe that a room or even a person could simply be lost. And in Ireland, there is Leap Castle. It is often called the most haunted castle in the world. Its fame comes from its bloody chapel, the site of a horrific family murder, and the discovery of an oubliette, a bottle dungeon filled with cartloads of human skeletons. Here, the grim history is undeniable. The architecture, the oubliette, is a real instrument of horror. The stories are not just tales. They are interpretations of a brutal past, a past whose memory is soaked into the very fabric of the building. The pattern is clear. The stories use real historical figures to give them a sense of authenticity. The White Lady, that classic ghost archetype, appears in castles all across Europe, a testament to a common psychological trope of tragic womanhood. And we must remember, many of these detailed ghost sightings are modern phenomena fueled by a growing interest in paranormal tourism. The stories are constantly evolving, being embellished, and kept alive for a new audience. They fulfill a deep human need, a desire to connect with the great dramas of the past, to feel that the people who lived and died in these magnificent buildings have not entirely left them. The final question, then, is why? Why do we remain so fascinated by these places and these stories? After all our rational explanations, after all the work of our scribe, what enduring power remains? It is the power of the place itself. The ancient Romans had a term for it, the genius loci, the spirit of a place. We may not believe in ghosts in the supernatural sense, but we can all recognize that certain places have a palpable atmosphere, a presence, and the medieval castle is perhaps the ultimate example. Here, history is not an abstract idea found in a book. It is a physical reality. You can place your hand on a sun-warmed ancient stone, a stone that was laid by a mason 500 years ago. You can feel the weight of that history. Memory becomes embedded in the location. The very air in a ruined courtyard, now filled with the sound of birdsong, seems to hold an echo of the past. The castle is a tangible link, a time machine made of stone that connects our modern world to a past that is almost impossibly distant. Perhaps we are drawn to them because they stand in such stark contrast to our own lives. Our homes are warm, comfortable, and brightly lit. The castle is a raw, challenging environment. It reminds us of a time when life was harder, colder, and lived closer to the edge. And by visiting, by telling, and listening to the stories, we can experience a safe, controlled thrill. We can touch that dangerous past without ever having to truly live it. In the end, the stories themselves, whether factually true or not, become part of the castle's identity. The legend of the princes in the tower is now as much a part of the Tower of London as its physical walls. The stories are the new layer of history, the folklore that grows over the bedrock of fact. The castle becomes a powerful symbol in our collective unconscious, a dream image of security, of danger, of romance, and of mystery. The work of our scribe, with his neat script and his logical mind, is never truly finished. Each generation that walks these halls will interpret the castle's voice in its own way. They will hear the echoes of their own hopes and their own fears, and they will continue to tell the stories. The stones of a castle hold more than just weight. They hold time itself. The stories of hauntings are merely our way of listening to the long, slow echo of history. The Scribe's Chronicle, our primary story, is now just one layer among many: the real, the imagined, and the remembered. Thank you for walking through these echoing halls with me. I hope this quiet reflection has brought you some peace. Continue to rest now as we explore a few final, fascinating details. Let your mind drift and your breathing deepen. The main story has been told. The chronicle is closed, and the echoes of the past have settled into a peaceful quiet. But our journey is not quite over. Now, with the pressure of the narrative at an end, we can allow our minds to drift, to wander through the world of the castle with a gentle, relaxed curiosity. This is a time for the details, for the small secrets, and the forgotten arts that gave the great stones their shape and their soul. Let us begin by turning our thoughts to the builders themselves, the quiet masters of the medieval world. They are the forgotten architects of the castles we so admire. We know the names of the kings and the lords who commanded these fortresses to be built, but the names of the men who designed them, who solved their immense engineering puzzles, are often lost to time. These were the master masons. They were not mere laborers. They were the brilliant minds, the chief architects, the project managers, and the master engineers of their age. A master mason was an artist of the highest order, and his medium was stone. Imagine such a man. He would have been highly respected, a professional whose skills were in demand across kingdoms. His status was far above that of a common laborer. He was well paid, earning a daily wage that was many times that of a simple craftsman. He was a man of means, a man of standing, but his true wealth was not in coin, but in knowledge, a secret knowledge passed down through generations and guarded with immense care. The skills of a master mason, the secrets of geometry and engineering, were not written in public books. They were kept within the confines of the masons' guilds or lodges. This secrecy was not for sinister reasons. It was a way of protecting their trade, of ensuring that the quality of their work remained high and that their skills remained valuable. To become a mason was to enter a brotherhood, a close-knit community of craftsmen who shared a common language of squares, compasses, and plumb lines. The life of a mason began in youth. A boy would be taken on as an apprentice, bound to a master for a term of several years, often 7. He would begin with the humblest of tasks. He would learn to mix mortar, to carry stone, to sharpen tools. He would watch, and he would listen. Slowly, he would be taught the basics of the craft, how to properly hold a chisel, how to read the grain of a stone, how to cut a simple straight block. After his apprenticeship, he would become a journeyman. As the name implies, he would then travel. He would journey from one great building project to another, from a new castle in the north to a new cathedral in the south. This nomadic lifestyle was essential. It allowed him to learn new techniques, to see different styles, and to work with other masters. He would live and work on site in a temporary wooden building called a lodge, sleeping and eating with his fellow craftsmen. It was a hard life, but one filled with purpose. Finally, after many years of experience, a journeyman might be deemed ready to become a master himself. He would have to prove his skill, perhaps by creating a masterpiece, a piece of carving so complex and beautiful that it demonstrated his total command of the craft. As a master, he would no longer simply cut stone. He would design. He would lead. Imagine him at the start of a new project, a vast, empty hillside that a lord has chosen for his new fortress. The master mason would walk the ground, studying its contours, its strengths, its weaknesses, and in his mind, the castle would begin to take shape. He would then create the plans, not on paper, but on a tracing board. This was a large, flat surface, often a wooden board covered in a thin layer of plaster. Here, using his compass and his straight edge, he would draw the detailed architectural plans, the curve of an arch, the dimensions of a tower, the intricate design of a vaulted ceiling. This board was the heart of the entire operation, the blueprint from which a mountain of stone would rise. His tools were simple, yet in his hands they were instruments of creation. A heavy wooden mallet for striking the chisel, a range of iron chisels, some broad for rough shaping, others fine for delicate carving, the square for ensuring perfect right angles, the compass for drawing the circles and arcs that were the basis of all sacred geometry, and the plumb line, a simple weight on a string to ensure his walls rose perfectly, flawlessly true. One of the most famous of these great minds was a man known as Master James of St. George. He was the favored architect of King Edward I of England. It was Master James who designed the great ring of castles in North Wales, fortresses like Conway, Harlech, and Carnarvon. These were the pinnacle of medieval military design, and his genius is visible in every perfectly placed tower, in every ingenious gatehouse. He was a true master of his art, a nomadic professional who brought his skills from the continent to create some of the most enduring landmarks in Britain. But for every Master James whose name we know, there are thousands whose names are lost. They were the ordinary, extraordinary men who did the physical work, and they left behind a quiet, personal signature, a small secret hidden in plain sight on the walls of the castles they built. If you look closely at the dressed stone blocks of a medieval wall, you may begin to notice them. Small, simple symbols carved into the surface. An arrowhead, a cross, a simple geometric shape. These are mason's marks. Each skilled mason had his own unique mark. When he finished dressing a stone, preparing it perfectly for its place in the wall, he would chisel his mark onto its face. This served two purposes. It was a mark of pride, a signature on a piece of work well done. but it was also a practical tool for the master mason. It allowed him to track the productivity of each craftsman, ensuring that payment was fair. It was also a method of quality control. If a stone was poorly shaped, the master knew exactly who to hold accountable. To find one of these marks is to have a direct personal connection with a man who lived and worked here hundreds and hundreds of years ago. It is to see the trace of his hand, his identity, reduced to a single, elegant symbol. You can run your fingers over the smooth, worn stone, feeling the crisp edges of the mark he carved. You can almost hear the rhythmic tap, tap, tap of his chisel, a sound that echoed in these places for years on end. You can almost smell the dust of the stone and feel the deep sense of respect for the immense, anonymous skill that built this world. As we look at the great, soaring walls of a castle, we see the grand design, but in the small, humble mason's mark, we see the human hand. It is a quiet reminder that these colossal structures were not raised by magic or by kings alone. They were raised by the skill, the sweat, and the artistry of thousands of craftsmen who left their subtle, secret signatures on the very bones of the building. The master masons and their teams were responsible for the structure, the strength, and the form of the castle. But they were also artists. And on the high walls and hidden corners of their creations, they often left behind a menagerie of strange, silent creatures carved from stone. These are the silent sentinels of the medieval world, the gargoyles and the grotesques. At first glance, they all seem to be part of the same monstrous family. Fantastical beasts, comical human faces, and terrifying demons, all staring down from the battlements. But there is a simple and important distinction between them. A true gargoyle is, first and foremost, a functional object. It is a decorative waterspout. Its purpose is to channel rainwater from the roof and gutters and throw it clear of the castle walls. This was a vital task. Rainwater, running down the face of a building, could slowly erode the mortar that held the stones together, weakening the entire structure over time. The gargoyle, with its open mouth and its long channel, was the solution to this problem. A grotesque, on the other hand, is purely decorative. It is a strange or fantastical carving that serves no practical purpose. It is art for art's sake, or perhaps for symbolism's sake. The name gargoyle comes from the French word gargouille, which means throat, a reference to the gurgling sound of water passing through it. You can imagine standing in the castle courtyard during a heavy storm. The sky is dark and the rain is lashing down. You would hear the sound of the water, trickling at first, then gushing from the open mouths of the stone beasts high above, a strange and wonderful music. But what did these carvings mean to the medieval mind? Their primary symbolic function was to ward off evil. In a world that firmly believed in the existence of demons and evil spirits, these fearsome stone guardians were placed on the outside of sacred or important buildings to frighten those spirits away. The more terrifying the carving, the better it was at its job. The carvers drew their inspiration from many sources. The Book of Revelation, with its vivid descriptions of apocalyptic beasts and demons, was a common reference. These chimeras, creatures made from the parts of different animals, were brought to life in stone, a permanent warning of the forces of darkness. But there are other, older influences at play. Some of the carvings, with their swirling patterns and strange horned figures, may have roots in pre-Christian traditions. Echoes of Celtic and Germanic mythology, of forest gods and nature spirits, can be seen peering down from the walls, a reminder of the deep, pagan past that still lingered in the imagination. Not all of them are terrifying, however. Many grotesques are filled with humor and even social commentary. You might find a carving of a man pulling a comical face, his tongue stuck out at the world below, or a caricature of a greedy merchant, his face twisted in a sneer. Sometimes the carvers would mock the local bishop or a famously grumpy nobleman. These were inside jokes, carved in stone, a form of permanent, silent satire. They show us the playful, human side of the medieval craftsman. Among the most mysterious and debated carvings are the figures known as shilanagigs. These are explicit carvings of naked women, often found over doorways or windows. Their meaning is lost to time, and scholars debate their purpose. Were they ancient fertility symbols meant to ensure the health and prosperity of the castle's inhabitants? Or were they warnings placed on the walls of churches and castles to caution against the sin of lust? They are powerful, enigmatic figures, a puzzle in stone that connects us to the very different worldview of the people who carved them. What is most wonderful about these silent sentinels is their sheer variety. The imagination of the stone carvers seems to have been limitless. They created dragons and griffins and wild, hairy men. They carved faces that are serene and faces that are in agony. They created a whole ecosystem of stone creatures clinging to the walls, and they often placed them in high, almost hidden locations, up on the roofline or tucked away behind a buttress. They were not always for public display. Sometimes, it seems, they were a private detail, a personal touch, a conversation between the carver, the building, and God. To look up at these faces is to feel a sense of wonder, to marvel at the skill of the carvers, who could take a rough, lifeless block of limestone or sandstone and imbue it with such personality, such character. For centuries, these stone guardians have watched over their castles. They have seen seasons change and generations pass. They have endured sun and wind and rain. They are the silent, steadfast witnesses to history. Their monstrous, whimsical, and terrifying faces, a permanent fixture of the medieval dream. The stone sentinels on the outer walls were a visible, though often distant, feature of the castle. But the builders also created secrets within the very heart of the stone. They created passages in the walls. The idea of the secret passage is one of the most romantic and enduring myths of the castle. We imagine hidden doors, activated by a secret switch, leading to long, dark tunnels that allowed for daring escapes or secret meetings. The reality, as is often the case, is a little more practical, but no less fascinating. Long, underground escape tunnels are almost entirely a myth. They would have been incredibly difficult and expensive to build. The problem of ventilation, of structural collapse, and, most importantly, of keeping such a huge project secret made them nearly impossible. The more common way to secretly leave a besieged castle was through a postern gate. This was a small, discreet side door, often hidden in an unexpected part of the curtain wall, allowing a messenger or a small raiding party to slip out unnoticed. But passages inside the walls themselves, those were very real. These were called mural passages, from the Latin word for wall. The great thickness of a castle's walls, sometimes as much as 20 feet at the base, provided ample space for the master mason to build corridors and small chambers within them. You can imagine the feeling of entering such a place, of finding the well-hidden door, and stepping out of a familiar room into a narrow, enclosed stone passageway. The air is cold and still, ancient and undisturbed. The only sound is your own breathing, seeming loud in the confined space. The primary purpose of these passages was military. They were a vital part of the castle's defensive network. They allowed the guards to move quickly and safely between the towers and from the keep to the battlements, without ever having to expose themselves to enemy fire in the open courtyard below. During a siege, this hidden circulatory system would have been essential for deploying troops to wherever they were most needed. These passages also gave protected access to the castle's weapons. A mural passage might run along the length of a wall, with a series of arrow slits opening from it. Archers could move along the passage, firing from one slit, then another, all while being completely protected by many feet of solid stone. They also led to murder holes, the grimly named openings in the ceiling of a gatehouse passage. Defenders could use these holes to drop rocks, or boiling water, or quicklime onto attackers below. And the mural passages provided a safe way to reach them. The great castle builder, Master James of St. George, was a particular genius in his use of these hidden corridors. His Welsh castles are famous for their sophisticated and complex networks of mural passages, a testament to his tactical mind. But these passages also had domestic uses. A private passage might connect the Lord's personal chambers, the solar, directly to the castle chapel. This would allow the Lord and his family to attend Mass without having to walk through the public spaces of the castle. They could also provide a discreet way to get from the private chambers to the dais in the Great Hall. And there is the intriguing possibility of passages designed for eavesdropping. A small, hidden corridor running alongside an important chamber, with a few disguised peepholes or listening shafts, would have been an invaluable tool for a lord who was concerned about plots or intrigue within his own court. The walls, quite literally, could have ears. Today, to explore one of these passages is a wonderful experience. The walls are close on either side of you. The stone is cold and rough to the touch. You might follow the passage as it spirals upwards, a tight, dark staircase within the wall itself. Then, you might see a sliver of light ahead. It is a hidden opening, a spy hole, looking down into the vast space of the great hall. You can see the great fireplace, the high timber-bird roof, and you can imagine the hall filled with the people and the noise of the past. To stand in such a place is to feel like a ghost, a silent observer, hidden from the world in the secret heart of the castle. So while the Grand Escape Tunnel is largely a fiction, the reality of the mural passage is a more subtle and clever truth. They were a key feature of the castle's design, a testament to the ingenuity of the master masons, who used every inch of their great structures to maximum effect, for defense, for convenience, and perhaps for secrecy. Our journey through the builder's arts has focused, naturally, on stone. It is the defining material of the medieval castle. But a castle was not made of stone alone. It was a complex environment of many materials, and our picture is not complete without considering the warmth of wood and the strength of iron. These elements provided the comfort, the functionality, and much of the defensive hardware of the fortress. Imagine the great forests of medieval Europe. They were a vast, wild resource, providing the other essential building material for the castle. Towering oak trees, prized for their immense strength and durability, were felled and brought to the construction site. Here, the castle carpenter, a craftsman as vital as the mason, would set to work. His skill was in shaping this raw timber into the floors, the roofs, and the internal structures of the castle. If you were to stand in the great hall and look up, you would see his masterpiece, the high timber-framed roof, a complex and beautiful web of massive beams and intricate joints, all held together with wooden pegs. This was the skeleton of the building, and the carpenter was the master of its anatomy. He also built the floors of the keep and the internal partition walls. These were often made using a technique called wattle and daub, a wooden lattice. The wattle was woven between the main timber studs, and then this frame was covered or daubed with a sticky mixture of clay, soil, animal dung, and straw. When dry, it created a surprisingly strong and well-insulated wall. Wood also played a crucial role in the castle's defense. During a siege, the carpenter and his team would construct a hoarding. This was a covered wooden gallery that was temporarily fixed to the outside of the stone battlements. It projected outwards from the wall and had holes in the floor, allowing defenders to drop missiles on the attackers at the base of the wall while remaining completely protected. The drawbridge, a vital component of the gatehouse defense, was another of the carpenter's complex responsibilities. But perhaps the most visible use of wood and iron together was the portcullis. This heavy, sliding grille was the main barrier in the gatehouse passage. It was typically made of a thick lattice of oak beams, with the joints reinforced with iron, and with heavy iron spikes, or shoes, at the bottom. It was immensely strong, a powerful combination of the resilience of wood and the unyielding strength of iron. This leads us to the other essential craftsman, the castle blacksmith. His forge was the fiery heart of the castle's industry. The air around it was always filled with the rhythmic clang of his hammer, the roar of the bellows, and the sharp scent of hot iron and coal smoke. The blacksmith was a master of fire and metal. He forged the thousands upon thousands of nails needed for the construction. He made the heavy iron hinges and straps for the great oak doors. He created the tools for the other craftsmen, and, of course, he forged the weapons and armor for the garrison: swords, spearheads, arrowheads, and the intricate, interlocking rings of a coat of mail. The blacksmith was the armorer, the toolmaker, and the engineer, all in one. His work was everywhere, in every hinge that creaked, in every gate that barred the way, in every weapon that defended the walls. Finally, wood provided a crucial element of comfort in the harsh stone environment. The furniture of a medieval castle was sparse, heavy, and functional. There were large wooden chests for storage, simple stools, and long trestle tables that could be dismantled and moved aside after a meal. But the warmth of the wood itself, the organic texture of a polished oak table, or the rough-hewn floorboards underfoot, provided a small but vital sensory contrast to the cold, hard, unyielding nature of the stone. Nowhere was this more apparent than in the great stone hearth. The fire itself, the crackling, blazing logs, was the ultimate symbol of warmth and community. But it was the combination of all these elements that made the castle complete. The cold stone of the fireplace, the warm, fragrant oak of the burning logs, and the hard, black iron of the fire dogs that held them. Stone, wood, and iron, the holy trinity of the castle builder's art, together. They created a world that was at once a fortress, a home, and a testament to the enduring skill of the medieval craftsman. And so our time in the castle comes to a gentle close. We have walked its walls, deciphered its whispers, and honored the hands that built it. The scribe has closed their book, the echoes have faded into a peaceful silence, and all that remains is the deep quiet of the night. The stories are told. Now is the time for rest. Thank you for spending this time with me. If you've enjoyed our journey and would like to support the creation of more calm histories, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Your presence here makes all the difference. Until next time, sleep well and have the most peaceful of dreams.